Good morning, everyone, and Brian, thank you very much. Hope you have a good morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm Margie Jean Gray. I'm the Executive Director of the Fort Lewis College Foundation, and I have a wonderful guest this morning. Her name is Beth LaShell, and she is the coordinator out at the Old Fort in Hesperus. And I will tell you, I've seen her at work, and she is amazing. And hopefully over the next half an hour, we'll learn a little bit more about her personally as well as her professionally. And so when you see her walking down the street in Durango or see her in the North City Market, whatever, you can stop and tell her you've heard this interview, because it's going to be really fascinating. So Beth, welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Sure.
One of the things that we love to do is people like you who are sort of behind the scenes that do so much for the college, but a lot of people don't know about it. I love being able to highlight people like you because you're so humble. And so, this morning, the first part of this interview, I really would love to learn a little bit more about you personally, because people probably don't know as much about you as we'd like you to know. So how did you get to Fort Lewis?
Well, it's been kind of a long journey, but I grew up in Ohio, and I graduated from Ohio State University and decided that I wanted to study beef cattle genetics. And Colorado State University was one of the schools that I looked at for graduate school. And so I moved here in 1984 to Fort Collins to start graduate school. And one of the very first trips that we took as a graduate student was to come to Hesperus.
Interesting. So that sort of began. I have to ask you, before we go into the next step when you got to Hesperus, is this is not a field that most young women sort of think about majoring in. So how did this kind of come about? Is this in your family? Or, how did you get involved with this as a major?
My undergraduate major was in animal science, and I was always interested in beef cattle and thought I wanted to work for a breed association promoting the breed, and I had a really strong interest in statistics and mathematics. And so I took a couple of statistics classes as an undergraduate, and beef cattle genetics is really statistics. So I still do a lot of statistics with research projects and, just looking at what their performance of animals are based on numbers.
So I have to ask you, were you one of the few women in this particular program, or am I sort of shortchanging women, and there were a lot?
Probably. There was a handful.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with Dr. Jim Brinks, who was instrumental in starting some of the projects at the Old Fort or at Hesperus. And when I met him, I just knew I had to work with him. And there were 2 other women in the program at the same time and about 7 men.
Mm-hmm. And so, knowing that this is where you wanted to be, did you feel like the Old Fort was like the perfect place for all this to sort of come together?
Well, in the 1980s, Colorado State University was still on the site, and it was an agricultural experiment station. So that's why we came down here. All of my graduate work was done at the Old Fort or at Hesperus, and so I'd come down once or twice a year. So when we had the opportunity to move here in 1990, I knew that that's where I wanted to work, because I was working for Colorado State from 1984 to 1990, running a computer lab and a computer programmer, and doing these work in statistics. So when the opportunity came for us to come to Durango, I started working at the Old Fort, or the San Juan Basin Research Center. It was what it was known then. And then once again, it was going back to that graduate school experience, because John Greathouse, who I had gone to graduate school with, was working in the agricultural department here at Fort Lewis. And he got elected department head. And when you're department head, you get to have some release time. So he called me in 1994 and said, I want you to teach a couple classes for me because I have release time. And I had taught at CSU, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy all the politics. So when he first asked me, I said no. I said, I'm done teaching at the college level. I don't enjoy it. So he called back a couple weeks later and said, I'll make you a deal. If you come teach, you don't have to come to department meetings. You don't have to be on any committees. This is a teaching institution. So I decided to give it a try. And what I learned was that I love the teaching, but not the politics.
Right. Well, hopefully you can get rid of those.
Yeah. And Fort Lewis really doesn't have a lot of politics compared to a land-grant school where everything is, research-based. So when John took the department head position at Fort Hays in 1995, I transitioned into taking his position teaching agriculture classes.
And can you tell me a little bit about that? I'm a kind of a city gal, and so the agricultural side is a whole new thing for me coming to the West, but it's fascinating to me, certainly. Can you tell me the kind of courses you were teaching and sort of what you were hoping the students would get out of them?
Right. Over the years, we taught basically the same type of classes. What really changed was the type of students that we had. In 1995, we had a lot of students with a lot of agricultural background. And by that time, Dr. Phil Schuler was here as well. He had come probably in 93 or so he was fairly new when I started. So Phil taught all the plant-based classes, soils and range and crops and medicinal herbs. And I taught the animal-based classes. I taught Introduction to Animal Science, which counted as a science credit here at Fort Lewis. And that was something that John had done just before he left. So that class was one of my favorite classes because it was almost all freshmen. Counts as a science credit. So every fall I would have 50 students from just about every major on campus. And I'd have one semester to teach them as much as I could about animal agriculture and also how to be good consumers. So it was a lot of fun, and I met a lot of students across a really wide range of majors.
How many of those students do you think sort of came in to take it because it is a science credit and got into it and thought, whoa, this is really interesting. This may be something that I want to do for my future as well?
I think there certainly was a handful of them at the beginning. And then as the population changed over the years, there was a lot more of them. What we see now and probably in the last 10 years is a generation of students who don't have a grandfather, an uncle, or an aunt that were involved in agriculture. So they have no exposure to it. They have no exposure to how hard of work it is.
Yeah.
And they want to be in agriculture. Where when I first started teaching, those kids were looking for a way out. They were going to go be biologists and they were going to go do whatever they could to get away from agriculture because of how much time it takes. Mm-hmm. So we've seen that change of population, and that's the population that all agricultural schools are dealing with now, is that these students come in with a ton of enthusiasm and no experience.
Mm-hmm. And what do you hope to be able to teach them so they can go when they after they've got? Because I know we had an AA degree in agriculture, and so going through that program for these students, and after the 2 years, a couple questions: one, where would they go from here? And two, what were you hoping that they would learn so that they would be prepared for the last 2 years someplace else?
Right. The AA degree, I would say that 90% of them went on and got a bachelor's here. We probably had 10 to 15% that would transfer to Colorado State University, primarily if they wanted to do something we didn't have, like forestry. If they wanted to do pre-vet, they stayed here and majored in cell and molecular biology, and our biology department has done a great job of getting those students into vet school. With our AA degree, we thought it was really important for them to get experience. And so what was different about ours is they had to have, I think it was 15 weeks worth of experience. Because when you have students that are coming in with no background in agriculture, it's very difficult to bestow upon them a degree in agriculture. A lot of our students went on to get the ag business degree, and we felt that was the same, at least Phil and I felt it was kind of the same issue, is that to have an ag business degree and not have an agriculture background made that degree challenging. So most of the students that we encouraged to get the ag business degree were students that came in with an ag background, because our business school is outstanding, and they really got a business degree with a little bit of agriculture. Mm-hmm. So our student population is certainly different, and it always has been relative to agriculture.
Well, how's it changed in even the recent years with the fact that there's no longer the ag department specifically? And what kinds of things are you now teaching the students that will take them to the next level?
Right. We're still getting the same kind of students that have lots of enthusiasm and no background. So at the Old Fort, some of the programs that we're working with is just exposure and education. For example, we have our education gardens, which is a half an acre with some hoop houses, which are unheated greenhouses. And this summer we had 7 interns. These were all interns from environmental studies, and most of them had no background in growing food, marketing food, value-added products, but they're really excited about it. And just to watch them over the summer to see how much work it is and realize, what all it takes to get everything to a farm stand or to a restaurant was, that's why we do it.
Well, I want to come back to the farm stand because that to me is really pretty exciting. And for those of you that don't know about the farm stand, Beth will tell you all about it and how you out in the community can get involved with buying their wonderful, wonderful products. But, we were talking about the old fort and the acreage that you're devoting to the agricultural side of things. Can you tell us a little bit? A lot of people know basically the history of the college, but they may not know as much about it as they think they could. And that is sort of how big is it, and what are the acres being used for? And do you see new programs that will be coming out there that will be in conjunction with the students that are down here on campus here?
Well, the old fort certainly has a really long and rich history. It was started originally as a fort in the late 1800s. And it was about 100,000 acres, which is something that a lot of people don't know. And there's some really great maps in the center of Southwest that show where it originally was. In 1910, when they decided to close, the federal government decided to close the boarding school and the fort activities there, they took about 6,300 acres, which is the size of the old fort at this time, and that's what they gave to the state of Colorado to be used for research and education. And also, this is where the tuition waiver comes in, because it was given to the state of Colorado with the intent that Native American students would always be educated free of charge and on the same level as white pupils. So that happened in 1911, was when it was finally ratified. And so that's why Fort Lewis started in 1911. Actually started as a high school during that time. And then in the 1920s, they added the junior college and phased out the high school about 7 years later. So in this region, we see community members who maybe had their parents went to high school there, or maybe they went to the 2-year school, because for about 7 years it was both.
So you had the combination of the high school and the 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
From 1927 to 1933, it was both.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the students lived there. So the agricultural part of it certainly started at that time. And we're going to talk a little bit later about the incubator program. And the incubator program is currently on the site of what we believe was the college gardens. So if all these students are living there and the faculty are living there, a lot of them worked in agriculture to pay their way to go to school. Mm-hmm. They worked in the gardens, they worked in the dairy, they worked with all the other animals, or they worked in the cafeteria. So we're really excited that we've brought gardens and food production back to this particular area that we have pictures of, where it was all college gardens at one time.
That's wonderful. That is terrific. Do you have them sort of, before and after, in a sense,
right.
Yeah, so people can see what the difference is. Well, you mentioned that we now have the 6,300 acres out there. How many of those acres are actually being used, with our students or other organizations in the area?
Well, we have a lot of community partners that have made our transition there since 2010. So we have the headquarters area, which is about 100 acres, 125 acres, and that's where all the buildings were, and the original college buildings are, and some of the original fort buildings. And then we have about 450 acres of agricultural production, primarily hay, because it's at 7,600 feet, so we can't grow a lot of other crops. Other than some short season grains. And the rest of the property is all range. So we have a grazing lessee. We work with the State Land Board on, because the State Land Board actually owns the property. And that goes till 2017. And so he brings in about 200 head of cattle for about 5 months out of the year. And then the rest and he uses all the grazing land that we have. And then we also have another community partner, and that is Southwest Conservation Corps. And the old fort is their base camp. And those are the crews that you see out in the summertime building trails and working on BLM and state lands and federal lands, doing different projects. So they come in the summertime primarily, and their crews will come in and de-rig, which means, wash their tents and pack all their gear, and then they also have their food storage there, and they store all their chainsaws and their shovels. And if you've been in Durango a little while, you probably remember when they used to do it there by Albertsons in the parking lot. You'd see these vans and trailers come in, and then they'd scatter stuff all over the parking lot. And then they'd pack them back up and be gone. So they come in 6 or 7 crews about every 10 days, and then they de-rig, and they're off for 4 or 5 days, and they come back and they pack everything up and go out again.
And what kind of not contract, but what kind of agreement do you have with them? Are they here all year round or just during the summertime?
When it first started, they were there only in the summertime, and this is another lease with the State Land Board that they have. And what's unique about the Southwest Conservation Corps is that they have a great pool of labor and not a lot of money. And at the old fort, we don't have a lot of money, but we have a lot of projects.
Right.
So they trade their lease, which they lease one of the older houses and then one of the shops for labor. So when these crews come back about every two weeks, we have some type of project. And they have done everything from tearing out fences to building fences to cleaning up areas. And sometimes they help us in the garden because we also provide them food. So they purchase fresh produce from us rather than purchasing it at the store. So it's another way of, a great partnership.
Absolutely. And the projects that they have, you've listed a few of them. Is one of the biggest ones doing the fencing, because that's a pretty unwieldy type of thing? Or is there anything in particular that they've done that has been really tremendous for the fort?
Everything they do to help us has been has been great, because they will have a project in the spring, or they'll have 45 people.
Goodness.
For 3 hours.
Wow.
You can get a lot of work done in that. Sometimes they mow the lawns, they weed eat. When they first started, they just were helping us clean out the buildings, cleaning up the things that were left behind. Now we've been tearing out a lot of fence, because we have over 100 miles of fence that was probably built in the 40s, and it's a double fence, and we don't need all that. So we've been cleaning up and rolling fence for the last 2 years, and we probably have another 2 years to go to clean up all the excess fence.
So it sounds like you have a lot of projects that
we
are
have a lot of
continuing
projects.
to go on.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you're just joining us, this is KDUR, and I'm Margie Dean Gray, the host of Notes and Notables. And my guest today is Beth LaShell, who's the coordinator out at the Old Fort in Hesperus, and she's been telling us a little bit about the history and sort of the kind of courses the students are learning from, and a little bit of everything. And it's been fun listening to that. So what is your favorite part of the Old Fort, personally? Is there a building that you think is great, or an area you think is really tremendous? Or is it everything?
Well, some days it's everything. I think the history that's there is certainly, some days when you're there by yourself, you just kind of think about all the different people that have gone through the buildings. My office out there is in a building that was a chemistry lab at some point, because we still have a sink with some chemistry fixtures, and it was also the president and the dean's office was in there as well. So when the college moved to town in 1956, this was the building that his office was in the back, which is now our lunchroom. And so I think just the history of all the different things that have happened, it can be a little overwhelming some days. We have 26 historical buildings still on the property. And probably one of my favorite buildings is probably the library.
Can you tell us a little bit about? I've been to it and it's beautiful, but for the audience who hasn't, can you tell us a little bit about the library?
The library was built in 1937 with some library funds. It was really interesting. About 2 weeks ago in the Durango Herald, in one of the the history parts where they do 175 years ago. They were in the 75 years ago, they were talking about that the college received a grant of $10,000 or $11,000 towards the total cost of the library of $41,000 when it was being built. So it was built in 1937, 1938. And it was built kind of in the middle of the quad, or out there, the original parade grounds. So the original parade grounds was 500 yards long, and all the buildings of the college were built around that. So right in the center, they built this beautiful library, and it served a lot of purposes as a library when the college was there. And soon after the college left, it served as the Fort Lewis Mesa Elementary School, because they were building the Fort Lewis Mesa Elementary School at the time. And so all the students came there. So they put a little kitchen in one of the stacks areas so they could feed all the kids. And then it had a lot of different phases. When I was a graduate student, it was a dorm. And so we lived in the library when we would come down to do our work. And they actually installed a shower in one of the old bathrooms so that we could live there for a couple weeks if we needed to. And then it's kind of transitioned back into a community building. So we took out all the couches and the bunk beds and everything, and took the shower out, and did one phase of historical restoration to fix the roof and to fix the boiler to make it so that we could still use it as a community building. So
what are the plans in general for the library? Are you going to be bringing those couches back, and or is it that if you've done really sort of as much as you feel you can for right now, and it's in great shape and good enough shape that it could be left?
It's been stabilized, which is the most important thing. Fixing the roof so there aren't any more leaks, and getting the heating system going so that we can protect the building. We still use it for meetings. The Conservation Corps uses it for their trainings there. We have dances there, lots of different things. We get requests for weddings in the building. It's just a great old building that has some beautiful architecture, and it's still a centerpiece of the old fort when you drive in.
If those of you who are listening, if you haven't had a chance to go out to the old fort in Hesperus, you really should. It, as Beth was saying, it has tremendous history, and a number of the buildings are still left. I'm sorry that there aren't more that are left, because I've seen pictures and it was just exquisite. But you should go out there to see the library and just see the other places where the students live and work, and Beth does as well. It's really quite fascinating. Beth, one of the things I think that has been so much fun as a community member here at Fort Lewis that you have done is the old farm food stand, and I just think it was a great idea, and I think that you've just taken it even further than it probably could have gone. So for the audience who doesn't know about it, tell us a little bit about how it started, what the students do to be able to bring the produce here to the campus, and just how does it work?
Well, I can't take credit for the idea. But what happened was that I had a research project when Colorado State was still there, and we were looking at organic weed management, and we were looking at market gardens and also larger scale agriculture. So we started this really small garden. It was probably 1/8 of an acre at the time. And I had a group of students who were doing some internship work with me and had some AmeriCorps hours. And we were doing these different types of organic weed management on this garden. And we got to the point where we could no longer eat all the produce that we were producing. And they were giving it away, and we were working with a group over in Dolores, trying to put it with a community-supported agriculture project. And one day, one of the students, Kimmy, said, we should just have a farm stand on campus. And I thought, okay. So those first couple farm stands, we sold like $20 worth. That was a big farm stand for us. And we weren't really good at figuring out, how to get everything ready for it. And then each year it's just kind of grown. And we're now offering meat products as well. So all the products that we sell are produced at the old fort. And as I mentioned earlier, we now have a 1/2 acre plus our greenhouses, our hoop houses, so we're able to produce greens in the spring, which are really popular when we can produce spinach and arugula and lettuce in March and April. And, it's just really grown to a great community event. So we hold it every Thursday from 1 to 4 from June, when we really have enough to go to the market, until October. And then in the off months, we'll have it once a month, probably in November and December and January. And then when we have enough greens, we'll go ahead and have it twice a month until we have enough product to do it weekly.
I know you've sort of moved around a little bit on campus, but the main point has been at the clock tower. But during the winter, obviously, that's a little bit more difficult to do. So I know one year you were actually selling in the biology wing. Are you still doing that?
We do all the vending now on campus in the Union Building. So we moved from the clock tower over to the Union Building this past year. And then the winter time, we just have it right inside of the Union Building. Okay. And we've moved around, and in the summertime, it's free parking on campus. So we do have a lot of community people who come up, and we appreciate all those people that come up. And then once school comes back, they can still come up because they can park at the meters just here by the light. And we've had a great community support, particularly this past year. And the students who have been running the farm stand have got to meet some people who went to school there, and they've got to hear their stories about it as well.
That's wonderful. That is really terrific. So where do you see the farm stand going? Is it something you feel is now worthwhile, that you're getting enough coming in to go out, that you're going to keep it going for a while?
I think so. The students sure enjoy doing it. It's a great way for people to connect to the old fort. And I think there'd be a lot of faculty and staff who'd be very angry if we got rid of the farm stand.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There are a million things I really want to ask you, and unfortunately we're going to be running out of time in just a few minutes. But one of the major projects you all have worked about, and maybe you could tell us just a little bit about this, a couple minutes worth, the Old Fort Market Garden Incubator Program. And I know that's in conjunction with other groups, La Boca, I believe, Center, and some others. And so can you tell us a little bit about that before we have to end?
The Market Incubator Program, it was developed as an alternative point of entry for small farmers who were really interested in farming but couldn't afford the land in this area or access to water. And at the Old Fort, we're always working on trying to fulfill our educational mission. So this was one of the projects that we were able to develop with the help of La Boca Center for Sustainability, the State Land Board, and then a grant from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, their specialty crop program. So what we have is 6.5 acres behind a high fence, and people can apply for a plot of land, and that gives you access to land and water, and also an educational program that runs through the winter.
Wow!
So it took us about 3 years to get everything in place: the water, the fence, and then this past year we had our first class. And we had 8 incubators on the land from 1/8 of an acre up to a full acre. And if you're interested in the program, our applications for next year are actually due this coming Monday. And you can get information on the Old Fort website or by contacting me, the Extension office. There's lots of different places that you can get the information from.
And how would they get hold of you in particular? Do you want them to call or email you?
You can email me at LaShell_B@fortlewis.edu. And the number out there is 970-385-4574.
Well, unfortunately, it is time to end our little chat here, but it has been fascinating. I've learned so many things, and I thought I know a fair amount about the Old Fort and what works out there, because I go by it every day because I live out in Hesperus. But I have to thank you for what you have done to continue this program, because I think it's a wonderful learning experience for all of us, not just the students, but certainly for all of us. And your enthusiasm and your passion for the Old Fort is just, it exudes, which I think is so terrific. So thank you on behalf of all of us, really, for what you're doing and for the wonderful farm garden stand that you have here on campus. As you said, I think if you canceled it, you'd be in real trouble. Yeah. So anyway, so thanks for joining us today, Beth.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's been a real pleasure, so thanks. And everybody, the Notes and Notables will not be on next week because of Thanksgiving, but we will follow up the following week and look forward to hearing from you and seeing you. Bye-bye.